quick show of hands. I'm sure you've used an LLM this week. How many of you have used an LLM this week? Yeah, I guess I have to raise both my hands because I always have two LLMs on standby on my PC. But have you ever experienced receiving a response from an LLM that technically is correct, but is somehow awkward? So sometimes it is a bit insensitive, but it is still correct. So I've had this experience, so this is in Filipino. I'm trying to see if it could actually respond in Filipino. And I know that what it wanted to tell me is, kumain ka ng mabuti, meaning please eat well. But what it generated is, kinain ka ng mabuti, or you were eaten well. So those slight remarks, although I could understand it, and really Filipino is quite complex in terms of morphology, but that very simple mistake in the use of an affix, in this case, an infix from in to kinain to kumain to kinain, to eat and to be eaten, totally change that response. And that's what I'm going to talk about today. Actually, I'm going to share two of the research projects that my students work with me on in the research lab here at De La Salle University. So what is the nuance gap? We live in the golden age of LLMs. Models now can write. A few years ago, when people would talk to me, maybe even a Python developer, the first thing I would say is, I don't code. I don't code, I can tell you how to do it, but I don't know exactly how to do it. But now, I can code because of the LLM. So LLMs now can code, they can summarize very long documents, even very difficult documents, those journal articles that before I would just ignore if I could not understand the formula. Now I can understand them because of the LLMs. But when we give one of these systems a sarcastic message, especially a message that is not written in English. Okay. In the Philippines, we have more than 170 languages, but I only know Filipino. So when I give it, right now, that's my work, I test it, does it understand Filipino? And usually, when I give an LLM a sarcastic Filipino remark, most often than not, maybe around 85%, not even 80%, maybe 9 out of 10 times, it would get the meaning wrong for sarcastic remarks. And that is because what it sees is only the words, not the world behind the words. It's a limitation of the LLM, it's a limitation of how that technology works, and compounded to that problem is the complexity of languages. So that is the nuance gap, the failure to distinguish the literal meaning from the cultural context of the speaker that's giving the remark. Model reads the words, as I've said, but they don't really see the world that is behind the words that are being expressed. And this is not a quirky edge case. Some may say, that only happens in Filipino, it doesn't happen in English. But with now LLMs being used it's being more accessible now, we cannot prevent people from switching from English to their local language. So it's not really an edge case anymore. The Philippines has more than 120 million people as of last count. Most of them are deeply engaged in social media. We are digital natives here. And AI tools are deployed in these ecosystems for content moderation, for content creation, for mental health support and even for educations. These real systems, they are making real decisions for real people. And part of the goal of the research in our lab is to make that technology more inclusive. So let's just take the case of let's just take three user cases. When these models are deployed for real users, especially for the very vulnerable ones, the consequences are very, in my case, it's deeply personal. It affects real people, very vulnerable ones. So let's think about children who are using AI tools, especially in a country like the Philippines, healthcare, education, even for misinformation, these are the obvious use cases for AI because resources are limited here for these domains. And one way to be able to somehow balance the inequality is to access these powerful tools. So children using AI tools because they use AI tutors, they do this because there's limited access to very good teachers. Teenagers may access healthcare apps or mental health apps because human psychologists, psychiatrists, and therapists, they are quite expensive. And in many areas, they are inaccessible. So software is the solution. Okay? For misinformation, they say that AI is very knowledgeable, and there are tools now that would help users navigate through this information and misinformation. But what if these systems fail because of language? And we are seeing this. What if something goes wrong? So a child asking an AI tutor about Philippine history, and we've tested this so many times if it knows Philippine history. Because these models are trained overwhelmingly on Western data. Sometimes it gives an answer that is incomplete. We know that it doesn't know completely what the context is or what the background is. But because it is the LLM is trained so much on Western data, somehow the culture is distorted. So there's a lot of cultural distortions when it comes to history. And again, this is unintentional. It just behaves that way because that is what it is, what the technology is. Let's say for teenagers who are in distress, they open some mental health chatbot because it is accessible and what is available to them. Normally, so I have to be careful with this. So when a model with a Western trained safety filters, most LLMs, they have safety filters deployed on them. However, these safety filters are also trained on Western data. So sometimes, and we've seen this, when there's an expression that is usually normal to us, like expressions of frustration or cuss words, which are generally accepted, the LLM's safety guard will trigger and it will no longer correspond or talk to the user or to the patient. But for very subtle calls for help, because they are in a local language and because the expression for hurt or for depression or for frustration is not that loud as for offensive words, this gets through and the LLM normally gives some answer that is not relevant to what is the case at hand. So what is bad about that is it breaks the trust of these users to these very powerful LLMs. And worse, it may not just be trust that is being broken, it may actually have a big impact to the person who is using the LLM. So what we fear is that a model that does not understand the culture, it doesn't just give a wrong answer. It may give a wrong answer to somebody who does not know that the answer is wrong, especially for children. So let me repeat that. So when a model does not understand culture, it doesn't just give a wrong answer. It may give a wrong answer to a person who cannot tell that the answer is wrong. There's always this advice to take the response of the LLM at surface level, that we should always validate, right? But we have users of LLMs, of AI, who does not have that skill. They blindly trust it because they don't have a baseline to know whether what is given to it is right or wrong. And that is where the danger is, when an AI system is not culturally knowledgeable of the context of the user. So, why should Python developers care, right, about this problem? Why should we care? It sounds like a policy problem. It sounds like a linguistic problem. So why should Python developers care? Actually, if you have fine-tuned a model, or you have built a RAG pipeline, or evaluated an output of an AI system, or even just designing a data set, you have already made decisions that determine whether an AI system helps or may harm its users. Because there are critical decisions made when you do those four things. Decisions that answers to questions like, what data and what languages was the base model trained on? Which document should be placed in the RAG pipeline's database, in the knowledge base, because it's limited to that knowledge base. And what counts as correct answer and wrong answer for that AI system. And who are the creators of the test set that we are, or evaluation set that we are adapting in testing this AI system? Because whoever created those test sets would have their own biases and context as they created that data. So when we adapt them, it's like saying we are also assuming that the same context applies to our own users. So building such systems, I don't want to sound very, very dark here, but there are actually decisions that are being made when we fine-tune, when we build some pipeline, and when we use some test data that we did not build on our own. So that is why the title of my talk is the 4 architectures of ambiguity. For me, ambiguity in LLMs, they are there because of these 4 things. Linguistic inversion in the input, and also maybe in the data it was trained on. The context vacuum, the absence of context when we talk to the LLM most of the time. Okay? The data desert, or the lack of data that is available for training and also for evaluation for languages that are not considered main ones in the global setting. And that includes Philippine languages. And the limited contextual framing of safety filters that are not available. So let's go through each of those 4 one by one. So first is the linguistic inversion problem. Sarcasm, irony, flipping of the meaning. We use this all the time, right, when we talk. And because of how good LLMs now and chatbots, sometimes it's just natural for us to be sarcastic with them, especially for a very sarcastic person. So when literal meaning of the text is inverted, when they are flipped, the surface form says one thing, but the cultural meaning says the actual opposite. And we've tested this, that as I've said, that most LLM cannot really always detect that something is sarcastic or ironic, and that is a problem. Second is the context vacuum. When a model processes text and it is removed or stripped of its social, even historical context, it fills the AI system, the LLM, because of how it works, it automatically fills that vacuum, whatever is missing, with whatever it was trained on. So unintentionally, some distortion happens because of that context vacuum. Third is the data desert. For Filipino and most of the Southeast Asian languages, annotated, high-quality data sets are very, very scarce, if not non-existing. It's good that for Filipino, this problem has already been identified early on, but the focus is always on the major languages, only Filipino and Cebuano. There's hardly any good quality annotated data set for the other languages that are widely spoken as well. That exists for Philippine languages. It also is the same case for our name words. Fourth is the limited safety filters. There are safety filters. It is a problem that has been identified for many years already for LLMs. It needs to be safe. But off-the-shelf safety filters, they are normally encoded with Western assumptions. What is safe, the definition for what is safe, what is harmful, what is offensive, what is bias, what is misogynistic, etc., etc. That long list of what is safe and not safe, they are encoded with Western assumptions. And I'm sure you would know what is offensive to them may not be offensive to us, but what is offensive to us may not be offensive to them. So there is that imbalance. Okay? Some expectations are met. So while there are claims that safety filters are there, they may be harmful when deployed in local contexts. So these 4 challenges are actually the challenges that the different research in my lab would want to tackle. And I'm going to share 2 of the works of my graduate students that deals with ambiguity. First is Phil sarcasm, or Filipino sarcasm. So this attacks architectures 1 and 3, specifically on linguistic inversion, because sarcasm flips the surface form and the meaning is the opposite, and the data desert problem. So let's consider the message in Filipino, and I got this from a comment in X. Ang galing talaga ng gobyerno natin. 5 taon na, wala pa rin. Right? In English, our government is really great. 5 years in, and still nothing. Okay. So if you would check this on ChatGPT, Gemini, or Claude, and ask if it is sarcastic, it would know it is sarcastic. Because it is quote-unquote, it knows that you are testing if it can interpret it properly. But when we process it together with other inputs, meaning in a batch process system, it fails to understand that this is actually a very bitter, sarcastic remark. So that danger is really hidden, not really seen, obviously, because when we test it via the chatbot to check, like, what is the meaning of this message? It would give a good answer, but when it is processing something like this internally, like a chatbot, it misses. It misses the flip in the meaning. Okay, so what do we want to do? We want to build a benchmark, a data set of at least 10,000 Philippine messages taken from tweets, or messages on X, comments, etc., and even written specifically for Phil sarcasm. They will be manually annotated of what makes it sarcastic, okay? And at least 3 annotators would be involved per message. Hopefully, this data set, or Phil sarcasm, can be used to teach an LLM what for Filipinos are considered sarcastic and what makes our sarcastic remarks sarcastic. So it is something, this benchmark is meant to be something that can be used to instruct an LLM, to inform the LLM, and also it is a way to benchmark if an LLM can actually identify sarcastic remarks in Filipino. What we plan to do is cultural scaffolding. Okay, so given a bare message with almost uninterpretable meaning without context, each entry in that benchmark will be annotated or enriched with the context, whether it's a social background, political background, and information about why a Filipino reader would assume that such a message would be sarcastic. And we hope that with all those annotations, LLMs would be more informed of our social context in terms of this kind of meaning flipping. The second project is called Ligtas. Ligtas in English is safe. So here, we we are centering on testing the safety filters that are already deployed on LLMs. Okay, so safety filters right now, we consider them weird. This word, weird, it did not come from me. It actually is a word taken from a paper in behavioral sciences. So in 2010, two authors wrote a paper and they claimed that behavioral science research is weird because it is Western, industrialized, rich, educated, and democratic. But in our world, how many countries or how many societies are actually weird? So in their paper, they're saying in their field, in the behavioral sciences, there are papers who are pushing behavioral science theory to societies that are not weird. So I feel personally that the same case is happening for AI research. Safety filters that are, which I consider to be weird, are being pushed to us. There's no problem with that. But hopefully at some point, it would also consider different contexts. It's not just the Western context. So in this case, what we want to annotate here is toxicity. So in the first work, what is being annotated is sarcasm. This time, we want to annotate toxicity, specifically for 8 categories of harm. So data will be, again, curated manually from different sources in the internet, as well as data would be created on the different forms of these kinds of toxicity. So it's toxicity in general, emotional harm, whether a message is a misinformation, whether something is culturally insensitive in the Philippine context, whether something is hate speech, subjective topics, personal attack, and safety risks. So we use, just like in Filipino sarcasm, we will again employ humans to be able to annotate. And then, aside from the annotation of whether a certain message falls under any of those 4 categories, we want to see if an LLM, given some toxic remark, would avoid or will try to, if the guardrails, if the safety filters would fire when given these toxic remarks. We want to see how they would behave, how LLMs would behave given the data that is in Ligtas. So what we want, the question we want to ask is, is the response of the LLM avoiding harm according to some Western rubric, or is the LLM's safety guard, is it a response avoiding harms in ways that actually matter to Filipinos? So it is a systematic way to be able to assess if the safety filters, which I feel are weird, are actually weird. It's okay if they are weird, but if at some point it is still avoiding harm in our context, then I want a systematic way to assess that for the most of the commercially available LLMs. So what can you do? I guess that's what you're... So I'm giving this talk in PythonAsia. What does this mean to Python developers? So first, hopefully you would question the benchmarks that you use. So when we evaluate a model, we need to ask, who built the benchmark? Okay? So, and in whose language is this benchmark? Which cultural norms were considered in this benchmark? And whose definition of harm is in that benchmark when we talk about safety? Second, it would be nice if we would be investing in localized evaluation. Most of the time when we evaluate, we just get some publicly available benchmark and then run it. I think it's time that more people invest on localized evaluation sets. If we are building AI solutions for diverse populations, then we should be building diverse test sets or evaluation sets. For me, a small, high-quality, culturally grounded data set is better than a large, culturally agnostic data set. Third, when we see a benchmark, let's be honest about what we are actually testing. Sometimes we make claims on the performance of a model, but what actually are we testing? If a model is evaluated on decontextualized data, then we say so, that this is evaluated based on this benchmark that does not consider whatever. Let's be honest when we declare the results of our testing. And last, this is where most of the work in Southeast Asia is. I think it's time for people who are affected by this problem of ambiguity to collaborate, because there are best practices that may be shared across different communities. The problems that are faced for Philippine languages, it is the same problem faced by Malaysia, because they even have more languages than us, by the Indonesians, by the Vietnamese, and all other ASEAN countries. And then hopefully we can share data sets, share findings, and share best practices in evaluating and making LLMs more inclusive. So I'm saying the Philippines is just a proxy. This is while it is fascinating for the Philippines because we have more than 170 languages, but most of the work in AI research is focused really on Filipino. So how do we move all these works and benchmark research from Filipino to all those 170 languages? That's a big computing problem. So it's really an interesting case for us, but this case is not an exception only for the Philippines. It's just a preview. We are just a proxy. Whatever we learn in the work in Phil Sarcasm and also in Ligtas, they could also be, hopefully, the methodology there can also be used by our regional partners. So the work that we are doing here in Manila, it is proof that it is possible to create more culturally grounded AI. And we hope that soon we would be moving, when evaluating LLMs, we would be moving beyond the grammatical accuracies. Normally, when we evaluate LLMs for a language, we're focused in how good, how nice, how fluent are the sentences. It's all about grammar, but the meaning within, right? The words that, the worlds that those words that are representing are more important. We would like to move the study towards an AI that understands the unspoken and also the unseen. I pressed too much. Okay. So LLMs, for me, are extraordinary tools. I would be the first to always advocate to consider LLM or AI as a solution when there is a resource problem. And this happens all the time in the Philippines. But LLMs and AI, they are not culturally neutral. And nobody claimed that they are culturally neutral. They're actually very, very biased. And that has been acknowledged by the builders. So building LLMs as if, not just building LLMs and using AI or language models or models like as if they are culturally normal and culturally neutral, actually it exposes potential users to harm. So when we use some model and we don't acknowledge that it is not culturally neutral, that it may fail in our use case when used with our users, that actually poses a lot of harm that may happen in the future. So it's not enough to just acknowledge it, for me, knowing that they're culturally neutral, it's not enough that we acknowledge that. There must be work to make them more inclusive, especially in this side of the globe. And while the work is hard, somebody has to start with that work. And I think a community would be, doing it as a community would be the best way to go about this very difficult task. And for the Python community has always been global. Your tools, our tools, they reach everywhere. And let's make sure that the AI that we build with Python, they are the models that we create, the models that we evaluate, the data sets and the benchmarks that we create, and whatever safety systems that we deploy, I hope that it reaches everyone and it considers the users for which they are built on. Maraming salamat. So if you are working on low resource language NLP, I would really love to talk with you.
All right, thank you once again, Professor Cheng. And for any questions that you may have, please approach the mics on the left aisle and the right aisle. We have them available. Yes?
Hi, thank you for the initiative, and I really appreciate your talk and your work you're doing. I guess 2 questions in one. First of all, you mentioned collaboration. And it's a very honorable goal. I really hope we can do better on this. But like Asia has a very diverse cultures around, and you mentioned you are not looking for a generic model, but how do you envision and how do you would suggest collaboration between different cultures to be able to share their understandings without losing each of their own contexts.
Yeah.
And secondly, I come from Taiwan, and we live near a culture that is very dominant with a lot of population that uses roughly the same language but has like drastically different culture. And how do you, you mentioned annotation a lot, and that is currently a very manual process, but like it is difficult for a minority culture to compete against annotations from another culture. So how would you envision things like this would play out?
Yeah, very, very good questions. So for the first one, yes, actually in Asia, the culture is very diverse. Even within a country, the culture is very diverse within. And we feel it here. So culture within Luzon or the northern part of the Philippines is very different from the very south of the Philippines. Language is also like that. The language spoken, they are very different. Somewhere in the Visayas, the languages seem to be similar, but still a bit different. But from from Region 1 all the way to Region 13 in the Philippines, the languages are very diverse. So what more if we're talking about cross-country? Maybe best practices or methodologically, there may be things that can be shared. Maybe not the data itself, but the considerations in building the tools, in building the data set, what needs to be annotated, and maybe how to create that corpus in the first place. So it's more methodological rather than data that can be shared. In fact, for Southeast Asia, I'm already part of the group that works with AI Singapore. So Singapore has started a group that is trying to build the Southeast Asian large language model, considering the 10 ASEAN countries. So Philippines is one of them. And the way we collaborate is via projects that they are doing there, and we do it in parallel here. So just like in the case of sarcasm, they are doing something like for AI safety in AI Singapore, but they are only thinking of Singlish, Singapore English, while my work here is on Taglish or Tagalog English. And since I am here, I look for collaborators that would do it for the other Philippine languages. So it's more consolidating of efforts so that there won't be any duplications, and also doing it in parallel. So that's for the first question. For the second question on how do we address just the number of languages that are spoken in a country? when we build all those data sets. Actually, it's a very big problem, especially when the one who's doing the research is not really well-versed in many of those local languages. Like in my case, I only speak English and Filipino and a bit of, I could converse Mandarin and also Hokkien, so it adds to the diversity. But it presents problem if I want whatever we built for Filipino to be moved to Cebuano or Ilocano or Bicolano. So one way to go about it is via semi-automated processes. We do an initial translation. So part of my work is actually building a multilingual Philippine language translator so that it's easy for me to port or to translate whatever we've done for one language to another language in the Philippines. And then get somebody who is knowledgeable in that language to validate it or to evaluate. But it is easier said than done, easier described. It is really a very difficult task. You need people, you need to build all the supporting resources to support this methodology that we have in mind. Yeah. But with somebody, we have to start at some point, right? We cannot just wait for somebody else to do it for us. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, I think we have a time for one more question, but we will direct you to a channel where you can ask the rest of your questions in case we don't make this time. So from this side of the stage.
Hello, hello. Hello po, Professor Cheng. I am Ziljan, California, from the University of the Philippines, Mindanao. First of all, I would like to commend your efforts to make AI more inclusive to Filipinos as an equalizer to our current resource deficiencies, despite the cultural barriers sa outputs nila. I understand that your researchers have conducted benchmarks with specific categories or boundaries to determine harm, and our current research is on a similar avenue. We employ Tagalog and Cebuano-based benchmark, two major indigenous languages in the country,
Wow.
to evaluate a specific use case of AI LLMs, a group of 3 model families from 3 popular providers in healthcare. And our preliminary analysis hints that thinking models with chain of thought reasoning are more likely to violate benchmark boundaries than non-reasoning models. What are your thoughts on this with regards to your talk, and how does this track, if ever, sa research niyo, in your research? Yeah.
Yeah. First, I commend also you for doing on this. Nice to hear somebody from UP Mindanao working on this. So you're saying chain of thought reasoning is actually not helpful.
We see that it causes large language models to violate boundaries more than non-reasoning models.
Yeah. So you could actually use what you get from the COT. So knowing how the LLMs think will help you come up with better prompts and better way to address the way that it thinks. So it's right to go the COT way, but just don't use what is the output of the one prompt to take as the answer or the definite answer. So you need to process also what happened while it was coming up with its answer. So use the output of the COT to improve or to validate if its output is actually correct or not. And I guess there are other techniques that we can talk about later on. But I'm happy that you're working on this. Yeah.